Hello. All ad revenue from this video will be donated to the Slave Dwelling Project. I wish YouTube would do the same. I know I haven't been putting up any videos lately, like in more than a month. I have been distracted. You can see how much fun this is. And I was gonna wait until I healed, but recent events in the historical costuming community and an event coming up next weekend compelled me to make this video. The largest Jane Austen Festival in North America is held at Locust Grove Historic Site, a former plantation in Louisville, Kentucky. Sorry not sorry for the clickbaity thumbnail, but this video is about how going to Locust Grove is an excellent educational opportunity. During the festival or any other time, they are open. But if we want to continue having a huge Jane Austen Regency happy-go-lucky costume event where many historical costumers go primarily to dress in their historical costumes, their Regency finest, and hang out, we need a separate venue for that. It's not appropriate to go to a former plantation and do that. And this video is sort of also about what such an event committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion might look like. Why am I seemingly suddenly not comfortable costuming at Locust Grove, considering I have gone there for years and done so? Well, until last year, I have been oblivious. I attended the Jane Austen Festival at Locust Grove 8 years in a row without realizing the site's history. Built and maintained through the forced labor of at least 70 individuals, 70 enslaved persons, from 1790 to 1856. Those last 7 years in indentured servitude. This is because of my white privilege, a part of which is the privilege of being oblivious. I so appreciate at Afro Coquette for articulating this particularly harmful aspect of white privilege. There are many harmful aspects of it. Please see her post on Instagram and follow her. I am ashamed of my ignorance. The June debacle in Colonial Williamsburg, which I will summarize the tea on later in this video, for those of you who don't know, and the subsequent reckoning in our costuming community reminded me of my shock and chagrin at discovering Locust Grove was a plantation, which happened in August of 2020. Oh, 2020. When I asked a black costumer I admire on Instagram if she'd ever been to the festival, and she said no, because of Locust Grove's traumatic past for people like her and that history's invisibility at Jane Fest, which made it uncomfortable and unsafe. She is right. It is safe and comfortable if you are white and can be oblivious like I was, but not for her as a black woman. And that past was invisible to me and other festival goers I've spoken to. I'm from north of the Ohio River, and like many who are, I had this misconception that northern Kentucky was just an extension of the states that border it on the other side of the river. You know, Ohio-tucky or Indiana. So the thought never occurred to me that the late 18th century house at Locust Grove was built by the enslaved, which it was. Especially since it was never mentioned during the few house tours I went on in 2012 to 2015, when I stopped going on them because they all seemed to be the same. And it was never mentioned at the countless JASNA Greater Louisville meetings I've attended at the Visitor Center at Locust Grove. These are not excuses, and I will forever after gain a better sense of place other than just geological for any event I attend or plan. The agony over whether and how to participate in the festival at Locust Grove slipped to the back of my mind during the rest of the insanity that was 2020 and early 2021. But no longer oblivious, I dived into the educational materials on Locust Grove's website, YouTube channel, and blog, all linked below, and found out they are fully engaged in the important work of bringing the lives of the enslaved to light, and are even making it the focus of their organization. But back to the privilege of being oblivious. It is dangerous for our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, Asian, people of color, community members, and we have to be vigilant and aware by continuously educating ourselves and being staunchly anti-racist. The Colonial Williamsburg reckoning is the latest of many. Will the determination to do better stick? With education in mind, the next few minutes of this video will focus on some of what I have learned about the enslaved at Locust Grove and the amazing work being done there to put their stories front and center. If you've ever been to Jane Fest at Locust Grove, or you plan to go this year and you are white, I implore you to view, listen, read, and reflect. Links are provided in the description below. Sidney Edwards and Caisey Cole worked as interpreters of the enslaved at Locust Grove. Their efforts are valuable. There is joy along with the heavy in this insightful video, and it is well worth watching for anyone who goes to living history sites. Locust Grove has several ongoing initiatives related to researching and educating the public on the enslaved at the site, including an enslaved interpretation task force, the Name the Enslaved campaign, collaborations with Joseph McGill of the Slave Dwelling Project, Cheney McKnight of Not Your Mama's History, and Michael Twitty of The Cooking Gene. They've also transformed the woodshop on site into an enslaved family dwelling to create an immersive experience and site for reflection. Locust Grove is in partnership with the University of Louisville's African American Theater program, now directed by the aforementioned Sidney Edwards, and their new interpretive program, Unfolding the Story, directed by Christian Wiltshire, which starts soon and sounds amazing. I wish it was happening during the festival so more Janeites just there for the festival could partake, but I'm going as soon as I can later in the summer. Historically, the stories of the enslaved were suppressed or ignored at historic sites that were once plantations for many reasons. Often white curators thought it was too uncomfortable and wanted to avoid conflict. There were sparse records of the enslaved. Few Black people wanted to portray the enslaved as interpreters. And of course, all of these can relate back to systemic racism. Locust Grove is clearly moving in the right direction. Education and knowledge of the truths of slavery, no matter how uncomfortable for white people, is the first step in creating empathy and understanding and moving towards dismantling racism. The Jane Austen Festival programming this year is also an excellent way to learn about the enslaved at Locust Grove and the relationship between race and Austen's works and culture. Most of the programming is virtual, but there will be a presentation on site, docents available to answer questions, and one of the researchers on the enslaved will be present. I encourage all white festival goers to learn as much as you can about the enslaved at the site with a sense of respect and reverence, and learn about the power dynamics of race in Austen's time that still impacts us today. Back to Colonial Williamsburg. For those of you who don't know, a large group of white costumers visited this former plantation, now Living History Museum, the week and weekend of Juneteenth. Their event was not inclusive because they neglected to make it open invite early enough for most of the community to participate, and only a handful of people of color were on the invite list before the days leading up to the trip. Then I realized the timing of the trip was the weekend of Juneteenth and hoped they would at least not flaunt their white privilege. Alas, a few members of the group set up a table and had a picnic or tea party close enough to some official Juneteenth programming to cause a distraction. Essentially, these fancy-dressed white costumers looked like wealthy white enslavers or people who were interpreting them on Juneteenth. The fallout from this trip is still reverberating across our community, with lots of apologies and non-apologies from participants promising to do better, questions about how to go on in historical costuming, what kinds of events we can even have, and emotional labor on the part of BIPOC costumers on how to do better, and I am grateful for the latter. Some costumers on Instagram, BIPOC and white, brought up that the same thing also happens at Jane Fest at Locust Grove, i.e. white costumers living out a white costumed fantasy at a place drenched with the blood and sweat of the enslaved, while ignoring that fact. This is true of me in the past. I was completely oblivious, but I'm no longer oblivious, so I am attending this year not in costume with the primary purpose of learning. Also, there were posts indicating that JASNA's involvement is problematic because the National Executive Board has been unresponsive at best, in addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, specifically racist incidents. JASNA National has indeed been very disappointing in developing and upholding clear DEI policies. I am pushing hard for my local region, JASNA Greater Louisville, of which I am an officer, lifetime member, and festival volunteer, to implement action items and policies shared with us by members of JASNA's DEI committee, which consists mostly of people of color, or at least it did when we started this process. We are determined to lead by example and create concrete change from the ground up, since it is not happening at the top right now. Locust Grove is in charge of the festival this year, not JASNA GL. We are a sponsor of the festival because of the efforts of BIPOC members of our overlapping Janeite and costuming communities to assist Locust Grove in creating DEI and community guidelines, who are speakers at the event and who are volunteering, and because of the theme of the virtual programming that promises to elucidate Locust Grove's continued efforts to bring to light the lives of the enslaved and race in Austin. And because the history of there are many reasons, because the history of the enslaved at Locust Grove will not be invisible during the in-person festival this year, yay, I will be attending, but in modern clothing, to learn and also to volunteer in person and virtually. The Black costumers who originally shared their reasons for not going to the festival talked about being uncomfortable going to a former plantation, where the history of the enslaved was shoved aside, whitewashed for the weekend, so white festival goers could remain oblivious or purposefully ignorant, play dress up, and have fun, especially if they only go there for the festival. Others cannot go surrounded by white people to such a place of generational trauma. These are very legitimate concerns. We can mitigate the first by making the history of enslavement visible and by respectfully refraining from donning the clothing worn by enslavers. But because we can't and should not mask the history of enslavement, the largest Jane Austen Festival and regional historical costuming event in North America, held at a former plantation, can never be truly inclusive because not everyone in all racial groups feel equally comfortable attending. Many regular festival goers are grieving over the fact that the festival will never be the same, never be like what it was before the pandemic. This pain doesn't hold a candle to the collective suffering and oppression of 246 years of enslavement in this country, followed by segregation and perpetuated today through systemic racism. We need to remember this and do better. So what would a diverse, equitable, and inclusive Jane Fest, where all Janeites and costumers who wish to could dress in their Regency finest, look like? Well, number one, it would not be on the site of clearly documented generational trauma for a marginalized group. Two, there would be clear DEI policies, clear procedures for incidents, and follow-through/enforcement from the festival committee, which would hopefully be diverse. Three, it would consistently feature diverse speakers on Jane Austen's work, her time period, and writers of color. Four, diverse workshop teachers would be invited and hired and paid properly. Five, the vendors invited to participate would be diverse. Six, some of the proceeds would be donated to local or national social justice charities. Seven, some attendees otherwise financially unable to attend would be sponsored. Do you have any additional ideas for how to make a future Jane Fest more inclusive? I've gotten several suggestions on my Instagram post about an inclusive Jane Fest in the future, including gender-neutral bathrooms and a lot of issues surrounding accessibility and being mindful of the Native American land, the tribes that used to live there and where they are now, on which the event is taking place. Please let me know if you have additional ideas in the comments. The festival at Locust Grove this year meets more of these criteria than the festival ever did in the past. And I think it is possible to meet all of these criteria in the future. I want to continue to support Locust Grove in their programming, and I hope all past and current festival goers do too. Go to Locust Grove, go to the programs, go to other events, but we don't need to have this happy-go-lucky Regency costume party there anymore, because not all people feel comfortable going. Locust Grove's very important work on the enslaved does require funding though, and it is unrealistic not to have any events at sites like this to draw new visitors and money. I think there is a way forward to still have the Jane Austen Festival at Locust Grove this year that is properly respectful, reverent, and upfront about the history of the enslaved who lived and worked there. A festival focused on education, reflection, and discussion, not only of the enslaved, but also diversity, equity, inclusion, and how we can do better in the future. And of course, meet your friends there and talk about, the things that you've been learning, as well as come and talk to me. Locust Grove staff and JASNA GL members, like myself, are determined to make this happen. Here are the known names of the enslaved at Locust Grove.